Hello and welcome back to Mike Reads the World. Today we're talking about Tram 83 for the country of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and it's written by Fiston Mwanza Mujila, who now lives, I believe, in Austria. This book is circulated around Europe since it was first published in 2014. It is translated from the French, and I had a confusing ride with it. I read it in about 2 days. It's not terribly long, pretty fairly big text. Barely gets to 200 pages. Nothing wrong with that. I really liked the idea of the premise of the book. We're in an unnamed African city, which they call the city-state, and there are two friends, Lucien and Requiem. Well, friends in parentheses. They're actually more like roommates, and they don't necessarily seem to be that friendly with each other. Lucien is a writer who kind of, he hangs. Tram 83 is a nightclub, and it's where most of the scenes in the book take place. Not all, but most. Tram 83 then is this kind of just center of sort of debauchery. There's just constant mention of like prostitution and all kinds of criminal activity that meets there, or like the mines. People who work in the mines that are the main sort of economic source of the city-state. Plus you have like corruption and all these things circulating around it. So it's kind of just this, it's sort of a speakeasy vibe, but you're definitely in an African country here, and but it's unnamed. And jazz is a big thing. There's always mentions of different musicians playing, like jazz from around the world, Cuban jazz, African jazz, whatever. You also have some Mexican bands, some native bands from the Amazon. It's this really multicultural, international place where everybody from around the world comes to, as they call it, they're called profit-seeking tourists in the book, not colonists or anything. They're profit-seeking tourists, right? And if we can take just what the book describes, it seems like what is most numerous in this place are prostitutes, some of whom appear to be, not of age. And that brings like a first big caveat of the book is pretty much every female in the book is seen in terms of her of sexuality and kind of objectified in that way. And there really isn't an exception. Like I really tried to think of one, but virtually every female is seen through that light. So that's something to know going in. So with that out of the way, I thought the whole premise sounded very interesting with the rhythms of jazz, kind of like a very experimental writing style. So right from the beginning, you have this long run-on sentences that describe the bar that I thought were cool, like brought me into the atmosphere, the rhythm. I was feeling it, right? So, for example, you've got like inadvertent musicians and elderly prostitutes and prestigitators and Pentecostal preachers and students resembling mechanics and doctors conducting diagnosis in nightclubs and young journalists already retired and transvestites and second-foot shoe peddlers and porn film fans and highwaymen and pimps and disbarred lawyers. Okay, it goes on like this for like 6 times as long as I just read. And then, you have all these interjections of like the prostitutes trying to convince people to sleep with them, and they'll be in the middle of the conversation throughout the whole book. So it'll be random, like, "Hey, you have the time?" Do you have the time? That's like the refrain throughout the book that keeps interjecting when you're in the nightclub, or how much, like they'll say other things too, but "Do you have the time?" is the most common. That'll be stuck in your head after this book. Do you have the time? And that's kind of the refrain of the entire book. And it has, even right away, when I start noticing like, okay, this is going to be a repeating thing that just is going to pop up in the middle of conversations. This is one of many confusing things about the book. But this alone was not too bad. But it's kind of interesting. Do you have the time? Like, what time is it? Or Now I know I get the idea that it's like code word for like, hey, do you want to sleep with me, whatever. But there's supposed, if we're gonna like think about, is there a higher message to it? This is where the translation comes in. There's quite a bit of this book that I feel like it doesn't translate that great. I don't know. That's my personal opinion. Like, um, and there's a reason I think that because um the okay, so there's so many things. When I first read this, okay, so I had a good first impression, but then as the book goes on, um I felt like halfway through the book, I still had no idea who these two characters were. Lucien and Requiem, who are roommates, and they're clearly the main characters. All I know is that Lucien's a writer, and Requiem is like kind of a mob boss type of guy. But then there's like later in the book mentions that they might have the same mother, but that's only mentioned once, and you're not sure if it's like metaphorical or not. There's a mention that Lucien was married to Requiem's ex-wife, and like or Requiem's wife because she thought he was dead because he went off to fight in the war. But all these things are only mentioned like one time. So I guess you could look at it as a puzzle you have to put together. But like there's no consequence that ever comes of these things. So you have no reason to even really put them together. And you come to know these things about the characters so late in the book that at that point you like don't even care about them because I mean you just have I had no idea who they were through most of the book. And like and all the characters are such caricatures that like visit the nightclub and stuff. They don't even feel like real people. They feel like caricatures representing different aspects of society, which again is fine, but I just felt like I had no grounding in this book of like something to make me care. And that was a problem, and I don't know if that's a problem with me or the book, but and it's not only that I didn't care, okay, like I wanted to care, but I think that it was very confusing too. There's so many stylistic things like the two I just mentioned, but there's also the fact that like the narrator switches between third person perspective and third person omniscient. Like there's times where I feel like I'm really in the head of Lucian, but then it switches and now I'm somewhere else. And then there's people interjecting, do you have the time and other things and will you sleep with me and blah blah blah. The prostitutes like just randomly always interjecting throughout this whole book. And so yeah, it certainly does give the feeling of being in a crowded nightclub and so on, but I could have gotten that out of 20 pages instead of 200 pages if that was all that I was going to get out of it. Even a couple characters like Emilienne and the Diva, two female characters who I thought had a lot of potential and seemed really interesting when they were introduced, end up kind of only being defined in terms of how they relate sexually to the other characters, and like they're just caricatures as well. So yeah, I don't know, and I'm not sure what this book is trying to say. Like there's a part where, for example, like there's some interesting stuff. Lucien meets a publisher. This publisher is kind of a caricature of publishers. He's from Switzerland. Lucien's a writer. He's trying to write a book. So this publisher kind of is like he's saying you got to cut your book down from 20 characters to 10 characters, then back to 20 characters again, right? It's kind of this joke. Requiem criticizes Lucien because he's like, oh, it's just like all African literature is just some lonely guy, never has fun, he's downtrodden. We need more like life and passion and sex and partying in African literature, stuff like that. But like I disagree. If you look at the Sundiata, like old African oral folk telling, if you look at Shaka, I read, it's like, and Africa's obviously huge, but I don't know if he means like West Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa, but like I've already read plenty of examples and plenty very varied literature. So I think that criticism of African literature in this book, even though it is by an African himself, is not quite valid. and it didn't cut to the core because it didn't ring true with what I feel I've already experienced in this project. So, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is I didn't really get a clever message out of all this. I didn't feel connected to characters. So it kind of got reduced just to being stylistically interesting. And when style is the only thing you care about, it actually ended up being more confusing than anything else, because yeah, I couldn't follow the story. There was just not a coherent story there until the end because of all this stylistic stuff the author was trying to do. And this is a first novel by 2014, and some people really like it. So this might be your kind of book. Like, I listened to some other podcasts and stuff after I read this because I was very confused, like, why I started out enjoying it so much and really wanted to like it and was totally predisposed to like it, but then just ended up being so underwhelmed and actually more negative. Because this is only the third book in this entire project that I had a more negative than a negative reaction to, rather than at least neutral. And why I had to know why that was, because with the other two I could actually explain very easily why I didn't like them, or didn't have a positive reaction to them. This one it seems like a book I should have liked. I guess I just thought the premise had so much more potential than what it actually did with it, and it might be a warning to me as somebody, I guess I've been trying to do some writing too, or any first novelist or writer who wants to publish something. Like, I don't know, maybe you shouldn't try to reinvent the wheel or do too many new styles in your first novel. And I guess I could be proved wrong. There, like I said, there's people who really like this book. One of the podcasts I listened to, there was a professor, I think from Stanford, on Spotify, who really thought this was clever, and a lot of things that he found to be really interesting about the book, I kind of didn't, or like the points that he thought this book was making, it's like I didn't get that out of it. Maybe I have to look at those parts again, but it could be that I just, didn't get it. But to me, if I read a book once and just end the book feeling like very confused, and in this sense I kind of feel like that's on the author, or maybe the translator, and not on me. I don't know. It could be me. It really could be me. Or it just might be not my style of book. I do like a little bit of experimentation. I like modernist works. I've read some modernist works like Joyce, and I've read Owls Do Cry from New Zealand, that have a little bit of the obtuse stream of consciousness. You kind of have to put things together a bit, but it kind of leads. There's rewards along the way, and there's enough that keeps you going, and I never got to a point where those books where it's like, oh, I just want this to be over, which is kind of how I felt about halfway through this one, unfortunately. So it did get, there were a few interesting things. Like, I'm not going to say it was a total waste of time, and I certainly have been puzzling all day over why I couldn't get into it. There could be, it's not impossible that I'll go back to it, because I am very intrigued why some people do find a deeper message in this. Like he's showing something important here about kind of this modern day globalized, what do you call it, neo-colonial societies. It is kind of interesting how the racial and cultural identity of all the main characters is ambiguous, except for the Swiss publisher. So like Requiem I think he's described pretty vaguely as having like long shaggy hair, kind of unkempt, and Lucien a little bit more proper and like clean cut. coming from the back country, and we don't really know what the back country is. Is that supposed to be like interior Africa, whereas the city state is like on the coast, and I don't know. It's all left very vague. A lot of details are left open-ended, and but it's, for me, it's just too open-ended, and it's like, maybe that's the thing. And I like jazz. I like jazz as music, and I like when books emulate music as well. I just talked about in my last video about Peru, how Jose Maria Arguedas brought deep rivers to the level of music, and it was so beautiful, and it's one of my favorite books. In this one, I see how the rhythms are like emulating jazz, and there might be, again, something lost in translation. There were many parts of the book that I felt were not translating well, or I really wanted to know how they translate it. Again, do you have the time? Do you have the time? And all I could think every time that was said, I really wish I knew what that meant in French, and if this refrain like is actually asked, does it have the double meanings that it has in English? I don't know. I guess that's the faith in the translator. But the book's inconsistency and openness made me really not have faith in anything about it, and not feel like I had any grounding. So this was like really free jazz, if you know what I'm saying. And I'm not a fan of like jazz, like that really atonal, free experimental jazz. Maybe in my most anarchic and emotionally troubled days of my life, perhaps. But this was a little bit too free and experimental for my tastes. I guess that's where I'll leave it. It just wasn't for me. I liked the idea, but I didn't feel like the execution of the idea, brought me very far. And I know this project is supposed to be kind of about like, experiencing something new, and this certainly was, so I don't regret it. It's certainly, I don't think that I'm going to end up reading anything quite like this in the project. It is a very unique book, a very unique style, and I do think there are people that will get a lot out of this. It's just not me. So if you do like really experimental writing, or like, another example is like you have the interjections, you have like random Bible verses that are just thrown in the middle of sentences with no explanation, that I didn't really bother to look up, because at that point I didn't feel invested in the book like I wanted to actually do that. I more just wanted it to be done. But like on a page, there's one page where it's just like the same word over and over and over again, that kind of thing. So if you like that stuff, definitely give it a try. I mean, I don't want to dissuade anybody who might find this interesting from it, from reading it. And I just, as far as like learning, I don't really know what it had to say besides. No, I really have no idea what it wanted to say. It felt like more style than substance to me. Like, I suppose I'm really trying, guys. So I suppose Lucian and Requiem could, be seen as representing different aspects of African society, kind of in struggle. But again, their identities are never really made clear enough to make that decision as a reader. And the publisher, he's from Switzerland, at the end of the book says, I'm more African than you guys are, or you are, or I love it more, or something like that. I don't know. If you do like it, anyone that does like it, if you got something out of this, I'd love to know what you got out of it and why. Because I'm definitely willing to give this book another look, another chance. Like I said, there are podcasts I heard where people talked praisingly about it, and I also heard some people kind of, while they said they liked it, they shared a lot of my confusion while reading it. And that's the number one word I would use to describe the book, is just confusing and confusing. Yeah, that's all. So thanks. Yeah, I'm not sure what the next country will be. I just I don't like talking negatively about books. I'm just really puzzled why I didn't like this one, because it seemed like one I would, and I guess I'm looking for some feedback about what people liked about it, and also um, I want to be honest about my reactions to the book, especially for me in the future, going back to these and try to see how this all kind of fits together later. And I know sometimes there's those books that you really don't like when you first read them, but then someday you go back to them and you find you like them. So this book was interesting and unique enough that I think I'll hang on to it, just in case, something goes off and in other books that I'm reading, and maybe it'll click. So yeah, thanks for watching. If you've made it to the end of the video, please like and subscribe if you're interested in following the project, and we'll see what comes next. All right, thanks. I have to start doing this on the floor so I don't smudge stuff. All right, yeah, pretty good.